Lecture 8. Cluster Analysis. Cluster analysis is a technique used to classify cases into groups that are relatively homogeneous within themselves and heterogeneous between each other. Homogeneity, similarity and heterogeneity, dissimilarity are measured on the basis of defined set of variables. These groups are called clusters. Uses of cluster analysis. So we use cluster analysis for identification of new product opportunities, identify competitors, potential market opportunities. What about data reduction? Data reduction, a factor analysis and principal component analysis allow to reduce the number of variables. مثل ما حكينا قبل factor analysis بتقلل عدد ال variables. Reduction. أما cluster analysis allow to reduce the number of observations by grouping them into homogeneous cluster. cluster analysis ما بيعملوا reduction، بيعملوا grouping أكتر، مش إنه يقللوا العدد ال variables. Also, other uses of cluster analysis, data classification. Both clusters and discriminant analysis are concerned with classification. However, discriminant analysis requires prior knowledge of the cluster or group membership for each object or case included to develop the classification rule. In control, cluster analysis, there is no prior information about the group or cluster membership. For any of the objects, groups or cluster are suggested by the data not defined a priori. discriminant بيكون احنا عنا variables ونعرفهم، أما بالكلاستر لا، في أرقام ما معنى إياها في variables ما معنى الأرقام اللي إلهم. Okay, market segmentation. Cluster analysis is especially useful for market segmentation. Segmenting a market means dividing its potential consumers into separate subset where consumers in the same group are similar with respect to a given set of characteristics. Consumers belonging to different groups are dissimilar with respect to the same set of characteristics. إذا كانوا ال variables مثل بعض شبه بعض بيكونوا بنفس الجروب وهدول السيميلاريتيز، أما بالنسبة للاختلاف هو بين الجروب والجروب التاني، بين كلاستر وكلاستر تاني. So we have the ideal cluster analysis. هيك بنشوفهم ككلاستر ال variables بيشبهوا بعض بيكونوا بsame cluster. our practical cluster analysis هيك بنشوف نحن لما بدنا نجي نطبق ال variables هيك بيكون شكلهم هيك points ونحن بنجي بنعملهم grouping. Steps to conduct cluster analysis. First, formulate the problem. Second, select a distance measure. Select a clustering procedure. Decide on the number of clustering. Interpret and profile clusters. Assess the validity of clustering. Okay, distance measures of individual observations. To measure similarity between two observations, a distance measure is needed. With a single variable, similarity is straightforward. Example, income. Two individuals are similar if their income level is similar, and the level of this similarity increases as the income gap increases. طول ما هني عدد الانكم قريب لبعض وهني similar، وكل ما صار في عنا فروقات بالانكم بيكون صار في عنا gap، صار في عنا فجوة أكبر. هيدي بالنسبة ل one variable. Multiple variables require an aggregate distance measure. Many characteristics, income, age, consumption habits, family composition, owning a car, education level, job, it becomes more difficult to define similarity with a single value. لما يكون في عنا كتير variables بالصعب إنه نحدد ونفرق بيناتهم. So examples of distances: Manhattan distance and Euclidean distance. هول الفورمولا اللي إلهم. The Euclidean distance is the square root of sum of the square difference in values for each variable, and the city block or Manhattan distance between two objects is the sum of the absolute differences in values for each variable. Manhattan distance بنستعملها لما يكون في عنا هذا الشكل، هيك بدها تكون A B، واليوكليديان distance بيكون هذا الشكل 2 points، الفرق بيناتهم distance بيناتهم. Other distance measures. So we have other distance measures, and we have alternative approach like correlation measures. Okay, clustering procedures. Hierarchical procedures. Agglomerative start from n clusters to get one cluster. Divisive start from one cluster to get n clusters عكس بعضهم. Non-hierarchical procedures اللي نحن حندرسها اللي هي K means clustering. Procedures هنحكي A classification of clustering procedures هنحكي عن non-hierarchical اللي هن sequential and parallel and optimizing threshold. وكمان on the same graph عنا hierarchical اللي هن حكينا عنهم قبل agglomerative and divisive، وكمان في تحتهم linkage method, variance, centroid كمان حنحكي عنهم، words method, single linkage, complete and average كمان حنحكي عنهم. Hierarchical clustering. Agglomerative. Each of the n observations constitutes a separate cluster. The two clusters that are more similar according to the same distance rule are aggregated so that in step 1 there are n1 clusters. In the second step, another cluster is formed and two clusters by nesting the two clusters that are more similar and so on. There is a merging in each step until all observations end up in a single cluster in the final step. So هون بيعملوا جمع للأشياء similarities ب one cluster. And divisive, all observations are initially assumed to belong to a single cluster. The most dissimilar observation is extracted to form a separate cluster. In step 1, there will be two clusters. In the second step, three clusters, and so on, until the final will produce as many clusters as the number of observations. Okay, divisive هن بصير في عنا كذا جروب كذا cluster، هذا بيعتمد على dissimilarities عكس ال agglomerative. Non-hierarchical clustering. These algorithms do not follow a hierarchy and produce a single partition. Knowledge of the numbers of cluster C is required, so هنرجع نستعملها بال spss ونطلع iteration and the cluster centers and the observations. Distance between clusters. Algorithms vary according to the way the distance between two clusters is defined. The most common algorithm for hierarchical method include single linkage, complete linkage, average linkage, centroid method, and word method. Linkage methods. Single linkage method is the minimum distance between two clusters. Complete linkage method, كمان it's the maximum distance between two clusters. And the average linkage method is the average of the distance between two clusters. Linkage method, word algorithm. The sum of square distance is computed within each of the cluster, considering all distance between observation within the same cluster. هي جمع المسافة بقلب الكلاستر. Centroid, the distance between two clusters is the distance between the two centroids. المسافة بين المجموعتين هي ذات المسافة بين هدول التو centroids. Non-hierarchical clustering K-means method هنستعملها بال spss مثل ما قلنا قبل. هنطلع the number K of cluster is fixed. An essential set of K seeds aggregation centers is provided. First K elements, other seeds randomly selected for explicitly defined. Given a certain fixed threshold, all units are assigned to the nearest cluster seed. New seeds are computed, so go back to step 3 until no reclassification is necessary. Units can be reassigned in successive steps. Hierarchical methods, no decision about the number of clusters. Problems when data contain a high level of error. Can be very slow, preferable with small data sets. Initial decisions are more influential, one step only. At each step, they require computation of the full proximity matrix. Non-hierarchical method, faster, more reliable, works with large data sets, need to specify the number of clusters, need to set the initial seeds, only cluster distances to seeds need to be computed in each iteration.